And now, on with the show.
Hello and thank you. We're glad to have you join us online for our Bible class. This is our class for Sunday, September the 20th. We're studying John's Gospel, and we left off in John chapter 11 after perhaps one of the most electrifying stories in all of Jesus' ministry. We're going to see certainly this miracle was kind of a game changer in how everybody dealt with him from this point forward. Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead. And when Jesus brought Lazarus back from the dead, he did that in the town of Bethany, which was 2 miles away from Jerusalem. And so it was right in the Pharisees' backyard, right in the religious leaders' backyard. They couldn't deny it. And the last thing we saw last week in John 11, verse 44, Jesus said to them, "Loose him and let him go." And verse 45 says, "Then many of the Jews who had come to Mary and had seen the things Jesus did believed in him." Ultimately, all of Jesus' miracles were designed to produce faith. And certainly this one is no different. This raising of Lazarus produces faith just as it was supposed to. Many of the Jews, it said, who had come to Mary. Remember, Martha slipped out and met Jesus, but when Mary got up to leave, several of the Jews followed her. And so there's been this following that's gone with her to see Jesus, and then Jesus says, "Take me to the tomb," and they followed him there. And it's that group of Jews who witnessed it, certainly seeing Lazarus come out of the tomb. The miracle was undeniable. And here they've witnessed Lazarus come from the tomb. They had come with Mary, but they saw the things that Jesus did and they believed in him. That is the process of faith that John wants us to see throughout all of his gospel. Here are folks who see the signs, and we're going to see that even the Jews call them signs. They see the miracles that Jesus does, and it leads them to faith. It drives them to faith. And so they saw the idea there, the verb for what they saw the things Jesus did. They had seen them. It means they looked intently. They thought about this. They put two and two together. They weren't just amazed by the magic trick. This is a deeper faith than that. And while there are better reasons to come to faith than just the miracles of God, they do testify to the amazing power of God. And these were folks who got it. They looked at what they saw and they put it together and they came to faith. Verse 46 says, but some of them came to faith. Verse 46 says, but some of the rest of them, basically, some of them went away to the Pharisees and told them the things Jesus did. This was a miracle. It was a religious miracle. And Jesus was a person of interest to the leaders. It would be natural to go and tell the Pharisees, but it does seem as if in this case, these were those who did not come to faith. These were those who were enemies of Jesus. And this is not simply a, hey, we need to notify the authorities, Lazarus' death was not what we thought it was, and maybe we need to tear up his death certificate. That wasn't it. This definitely had a tone of opposition to it. These were enemies. And they go and they almost tattle to the Pharisees, telling them what Jesus did. And I'm reminded of what Jesus had said in Luke when he told the story of the rich man and Lazarus says, "Oh, just send somebody back. My brothers will believe." And Jesus had said there through the parable, if they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, they'll not be persuaded even if someone rises from the dead. Here Lazarus has come back from the dead and they're not persuaded to believe. Instead, they go and they tattle. They told him the things that Jesus did. Verse 47, then the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, "What shall we do? For this man works many signs." They get together, and now you're going to see the chief priests and the Pharisees. That represents the whole of the Sanhedrin. The two main political parties amongst the Jews were the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Sadducees were represented mostly in the priesthood. The Pharisees were the scribes and the teachers. And so to say the chief priests and the Pharisees really represents the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They come together, and we're going to see they actually come together more than just this. They're actually united in their opposition to Jesus. They couldn't agree on anything, but they agreed about Jesus. They come together and they say, what do we do? Literally, it's what are we doing? Maybe they're saying, you know what, we've tried to oppose this guy and nothing we're doing is working. And so they come together and they say, we've got to do something because this man works many signs. They said these miracles that Jesus is doing, they're not just tricks. They're not just a show. They're a sign. They point to a deeper truth. That's what it means to call a miracle a sign. It means it points to a deeper truth. And even his enemies acknowledge these miracles are signs. And as they come together, here is the Sanhedrin. And this is an unofficial meeting at this point, but they say we've got to do something. Verse 48, if we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. The Jewish leaders acknowledge something powerful here. Without intervention, without us doing something about it, the natural reaction of everybody who sees these miracles will be to come to faith in Jesus. That's powerful. Think about that for a minute. Even his enemies said the logical conclusion to these miracles is he's the Son of God and we need to believe in him as the Messiah. And they choose not to accept that. If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him. And if that happens, the Romans will come and they'll take away both our place and our nation. Our place probably refers to the temple. That's our place. That's where the center of our worship. And our nation probably refers to their kind of semi-autonomous status. They had some freedoms that they'd been given by the Roman government, and they were afraid of losing those. The truth is they're really afraid of losing their position as people of power and influence among the Jews. But they trump it up and make it sound all good of, oh, we're just doing this because the Romans might come and they would destroy the temple and they would take away our status amongst the people that Rome governs. And so they said, we're afraid of that, but it's really their own greed for power and prestige and privilege that's behind it all. Verse 49 says, and one of them, Caiaphas, being high priest that year, said to them, you know nothing at all. We'll look at the rest of what Caiaphas says in just a moment. The office of high priest was supposed to be appointed for life, but the Romans decided they could appoint the high priest. And anytime the high priest made them mad, they changed it. Now, they didn't do it every year. To say that Caiaphas was the high priest that year kind of makes it sound like it was an annual position. It wasn't. There had been a pretty high turnover rate there for a little while. But the truth is that Caiaphas was the high priest that year, the year Jesus died. That was the year everybody talks about. You know, perhaps with all that we're going through right now in 2020, we might get that a little bit better than other times. When we can just say that year, everybody knows that year, 2020 was that year. Well, this was that year, the year that Jesus was killed. That's the year when Caiaphas was high priest. Caiaphas is identified as the high priest. He was appointed by the Romans. We know that Caiaphas is the son-in-law of Annas. Annas had been high priest for quite some time, actually, and he was finally removed by the Romans. And according to history, they go through a couple very quickly, and then Caiaphas ends up coming into that office. And Caiaphas holds that office for quite a few years. Caiaphas ends up being high priest for 18 years, according to the Roman historical records. But it was that year. Of all of his 18 years, it was that year that was the big one. And Caiaphas was the high priest that year. And he said to them, you know nothing at all. And boy, that phrase, we don't even quite capture it. Caiaphas is insulting to them. You're all idiots. You don't know what you're talking about. You all have lost your mind. Josephus is a Jewish historian, and he says the Sadducees were particularly known for their very abrasive way of talking, even to each other. And Caiaphas certainly seems to hold that up as well. He says, you guys know nothing at all. Verse 50, nor do you consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people and not that the whole nation should perish. Caiaphas says, number one, you don't get it. You are so blind, you don't get it. The best thing that could happen is for one man to die and our nation to live through all this. It's expedient for you. And really that shows us deep down their concern was not for justice, not for what's right, not even for what's best for the Jews. It was for what's expedient, what's going to get things back to normal as quickly as possible. And Caiaphas said, one death for all the people is a good trade. It's expedient that one man should die for the people rather than the whole nation should perish. It is interesting. Several have commented on John's irony here. And sure enough, John says, verse 51, now this he did not say on his own authority, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. Caiaphas and John both spoke of Jesus' death as a substitutionary one. The nation was supposed to die, and Jesus took its place. Jesus' death was substitutionary. It is his life instead of theirs. But John has a very different perspective than Caiaphas does. Caiaphas says, if Jesus dies, all the things we hold dear can live, and our nation won't be punished. John understands on a spiritual level. He said Jesus was going to die, and he said Caiaphas is actually speaking at the will of God. He prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, verse 52, and not for that nation only, but also that he would gather together in one the children of God who were scattered abroad. For the Jews, that would refer to the dispersion, the diaspora, those Jews that were scattered all about. John is speaking, though, of all these potential children of God who would become the children of God based, number one, on the fact that Jesus died for them, and number two, on their obedient response in faith. And so John says Jesus is going to, Caiaphas just says, I think he'll take care of us here in Jerusalem. If Jesus dies, things will go easier for us in Jerusalem. And John said Jesus' death is far greater than Caiaphas could possibly have imagined. It's not for that nation only, but it is for all the children of God who were scattered abroad. He would gather them into one. And verse 53 says, then, from that day on, they plotted to put him to death. It now becomes the official position of the Sanhedrin that Jesus must die. We know that's been their idea. The desire to kill him had begun all the way back in chapter 5 when Jesus healed the lame man on the Sabbath. They said, boy, we wish we could just get rid of this guy. But now it's become the official position. From that day on, they are looking for a way to put Jesus to death. And verse 54 says, therefore, Jesus no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there into the country near the wilderness to a city called Ephraim, and there remained with his disciples. Therefore is an important word. Because the Jews had decided to kill Jesus, Jesus changed his mind, changed his plans, changed his habits. Do you realize what that means? Jesus knew the minute they decided to kill him, Jesus knew. Therefore says, as a result of the fact that Jesus knew what their decision was, that they were going to try and kill him, he moved out to the village of Ephraim and stayed there with his disciples. He knew, he had full knowledge of his opposition and of their plan to kill him. And so he moved out of town, out into near the wilderness to stay for a time. Verse 55 says, and the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went from the country up to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. This is the third Passover that John mentions in connection with Jesus' ministry. The first is very early on. In fact, while John the Baptist is still preaching, it mentions that Jesus went to Jerusalem following his baptism, and he performed those signs that caused some to believe. We read about that in John chapter 2. It's when Nicodemus visits Jesus after that first Passover. The second Passover takes place during Jesus' Galilean ministry. It's that time when Jesus begins to say, I am the bread of life. And now we get to the third and the final Passover of Jesus' ministry. Putting 3 Passovers in Jesus' ministry tells us that his ministry lasted over 2 years. And that's why most folks think that Jesus' ministry lasted about 3 years. It also helps us to get some idea of the date. We know that this happens in Herod's temple, and Herod's rebuilding of the temple began about 19 BC. And then we know from John chapter 2 that the project had spanned 46 years at the time of that first Passover, which would date those events to AD 27. So now 3 years later, we're at AD 30, which for many has long been considered the date, the year that Jesus died, AD 30. There is some contention that there's a 3-year gap that gets missed in the calculation of the date, and so some will say it's actually AD 33. You can read on that and study it. Regardless, this is the third Passover. And lots of the Jews go ahead of time to purify themselves. There were ritual requirements of what the Jews were expected to do. And so they would show up early to take care of that. In verse 56, then they saw Jesus and spoke among themselves as they stood in the temple. What do you think? That he will not come to the feast? It's portrayed as one question, but it's actually 2. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? It means everybody was talking about it. What do you think about this? And then the idea, the second question, that he will not come to the feast, it's a question that's asked that expects a negative answer. Everybody seems to be assuming that Jesus would be a no-show. the public is aware that the leaders are asking for Jesus, that they want to arrest him. Verse 57 says, both the chief priests and the Pharisees had given a command that if anyone knew where he was, he should report it, that they might seize him. Everyone's aware of that, and so they said, I bet Jesus stays away this year. And because they knew of the orders that had happened, it's what everybody was talking about. And this last little section kind of serves as a bridge from the resurrection of Lazarus to the events that happen in chapter 12 that again lead up to the crucifixion of Jesus and finally his resurrection. In chapter 12, we're now 6 days before the Passover, so we're still in that week before Passover. Verse 1 says, then 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus, who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead, where Lazarus was, who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead. Lazarus has become quite the hero, as you can imagine. Everybody wants to see Lazarus. And Jesus comes to Bethany and he eats. The events in this chapter cause some Bible historians to kind of scratch their heads a little bit. The relationship, this event is told in all four Gospels, but it's a little bit different in each one. In fact, it seems pretty clear actually that Luke tells of a separate event. It just looks kind of similar. Matthew and Mark are very similar. Matthew 26, Mark 14, both record what we're about to read here. They tell us that this happened at the home of Simon the leper. Likely he lived there in Bethany. Some folks have tried to say that Lazarus and Simon are the same person. That doesn't seem to make much sense. But here we see that there is this is the Bethany, which has become known as kind of the hometown of Lazarus, the guy who came back from the dead. In verse 2, there they made him a supper. We're not identified who they was, but Mary and Martha would have lived there, and they're serving, so it seems like they had a role in this meal. Perhaps it's at the home of Simon the leper, but Mary and Martha help out. They made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him. Your Bible may say reclined at the table. Remember, in the time of Jesus in the first century there in the Middle East, the table was very low and close to the floor, and you sat on the floor with your feet stretched out beside you. And so here the men would be the ones sitting all around the table. It seems that there are at least 15 men, 12 apostles, plus Jesus, plus Lazarus, plus Simon, and they're all there together. The events recorded in Luke's gospel are recorded at Simon the Pharisee's house in a completely different place in a completely different time in Jesus' ministry. But here they're all gathered together at the home of Simon the leper. And we're reading about this event. And it says they made him supper. Martha served. Lazarus is sitting with him. Verse 3, then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. Mary, who we assume is Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus, Mary comes and she anoints Jesus with spikenard. Spikenard was a perfume. It was made from the nard plant, which grew in India, and it grew in little tiny spikes, and that's where you got the oil from. And so it gets its name, spikenard, simply from that. And this was very costly. Your Bible may say pure. The word there literally is faithful. It means genuine. So here is this oil, this perfume, that's very rare, and it's pure. It's not been diluted with water or anything else, and so you can imagine how valuable it is. We're going to see later on it might be worth as much as a year's salary right there. Martha is serving, we find out, and Mary is the one who comes and she anoints the feet of Jesus. She wiped his feet with her hair. The house is filled with the fragrance of the oil. And verse 4 says, but one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, said. John is the only one to identify Judas as the one who said this. Matthew and Mark simply tell us the disciples are offended. That's a lot of money to waste on just pouring it over Jesus' feet. But Judas specifically seems to have led the charge there. It is very costly, and Judas is upset. Judas is identified as Judas Iscariot, Judas, Simon's son, and Judas, the one who would betray Jesus. For all the disciples, what Judas does is so burned into their memory that every time Judas is mentioned, it's Judas, the one who would betray him. Judas is identified as one of the disciples, but he's the one who would betray Jesus. And Judas says, verse 5, why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? A denarius was a day's wages. Accounting for weekends and holidays and all of that, 300 days' wages was pretty much what you could expect to earn in a year. And so Judas says, hey, this was a year's worth of wage. Why not sell it and give that to the poor? Boy, that sounds holy and special. You know, we're supposed to take care of the poor. It seems like a waste to put this perfume on Jesus. Sell it and give that money and let us come take care of the poor. But Judas, while he sounds good, he isn't good. Verse 6, this he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the money box, and he used to take what was put in it. Judas doesn't speak from pure motives. Judas speaks because he's a thief. He steals out of the common money box, and he was in charge of it. To be put in charge of it, Judas almost certainly had some talent with money. But along with talent and along with responsibility comes temptation. And we already see that Judas has begun to give in to temptation. He's stealing from the money box. Verse 7, but Jesus said, let her alone. She's kept this for the day of my burial. For the poor you have with you always, but me you do not have always. Jesus said, you leave her alone. He takes up for Mary here. And he said, she has kept this. She's been setting this aside all this time. She has kept this so that she would have it ready for the day of my burial. It turns out anointing a body with perfume was part of the actions that you took to prepare a body. But Jesus' body never gets anointed. He dies on the Sabbath day. They wrap him up and bury him before sunset, and there's no time. And when the women come to do all of that, that's when they find the tomb empty. And so this ends up being the only time that Jesus' body is prepared. Jesus says, leave her alone. And he said, you know, the poor you have with you always, but me you don't always have. Some translations include where Jesus has said, she's done what she could, or she's done a good thing for me. This is good. You will have opportunity to take care of the poor all along, but this was a unique opportunity. This was one that you won't get every day. And verse 9 says, now a great many of the Jews knew that he was there, and they came, not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might also see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. It's only 2 miles from Jerusalem. It's a Passover week, and so there's lots of extra people there, and the 2-mile journey seems worth it to go and see the guy who's come back from the dead. And so John tells us a great crowd of people came. In verse 10, but the chief priests plotted to put Lazarus to death also, because on account of him, many of the Jews went away and believed in Jesus. I love this story. You see the reaction. Some folks come to faith. Some folks go and tattle to the Pharisees. But here you see the chief priests, the Sadducees, who were the ones who did not believe in resurrection. They're confronted with a guy who's back from the dead. And they said, you know what we got to do with him? We got to kill him again. What if Jesus raises him back again? We'll kill him again. That seems to be their only mentality. Here's a guy who's come back from the dead, and they say, let's send him back to the dead and see if that works out. They plotted to put Lazarus to death also because they understood. They got that as long as Lazarus was alive and people were going to see him and listening to what he had to say and hearing his story, they would be coming to faith in Jesus because of Lazarus rising from the dead. They knew many of the Jews had gone away and believed in Jesus because of this. And so they said, we got to put this to a stop. And they've already decided we got to put Jesus to a stop, so we're going to stop his heart. And they say, you know what, while we're at it, let's just go ahead and kill Lazarus as well. That would make things a lot easier. We'll pick up in verse 12 next week with the triumphal entry and see what happens in Jesus' final week there in Jerusalem. But that's a great point for us to stop at and look at how people respond to Jesus. Ultimately, faith is still a decision. There are facts to be considered. There are decisions that we need to make about what happened and what will happen. But ultimately, it's a choice. And you see folks who chose to believe and folks who chose not to believe no matter what. And that's what challenges us in our faith as well. Let's pray as we close today. Almighty God, you're good to us and you bless us. God, thank you. Thank you that you have given us so much evidence to be able to see you and to see your works. Thank you for the blessings you've poured out on us. And God, I pray that we would choose to have faith, choose to come to you in faith, choose to trust you in faith. God, thank you for that. Thank you that you reward our faith. I pray that you would bless us and watch over us. In Jesus' name, amen.